In part one of our conversation with Dr. Keith, we explored his teaching about the journey from trauma into transcendence. In this part two of the conversation, we trace through his entire body of work, his experience, the books he wrote, and what he's looking forward to at this point of his journey. This was a beautiful trace through the trauma to transcendence body of work, and I want to now trace through your journey, both to learn about the body of work that's emerged, and also to really put everything we've just explored now through the lens of your experience. So how would you describe this point when you choose to focus on psychotherapy and concurrently on martial arts, where you deliberately saying, I'm going to embrace the healer and the warrior archetypes? Was it more intuitive? How would you describe that genesis point?
Okay. There basically are two eras in my professional life. And the first era started when I hit adolescence. I had a pretty happy childhood. I happen to be someone who's highly empathic, and also I have a large capacity for visual spatial thinking, meaning I can put together concepts. They come together and they create forms for me. So I was adolescent, 1961, 62. When I was hitting adolescence, 63, I didn't care for anything about that world. The war of Vietnam was horrific. My parents were normal parents, drinking too much, deteriorating, not happy with each other. My in-laws were beginning to die of the diseases of the time, heart disease, cancer, and so on. Didn't much care for teen culture. And so I got depressed and hostile, and I was very unpleasant. I have two brothers. I'm a middle child. And so as I got more depressed and hostile, I was basically ignored until I was at a prep school at the time. I started getting B's instead of A's because, I happen to have a mind that, can easily excel at that kind of stuff. And I wasn't. So, my parents were both school teachers. They were alarmed. Oh my God. So they found a therapist, and we went to therapy. And I was so pissed. I wouldn't talk, just the kind of things that hostile teenagers can do. But also, there was something about that therapy session that was magic. The energetic charge was magic. When he talked, it sounded like a native tongue. It sounded like a language that I'd spoken before I was like 3 or 4 and then never heard again until then. I was too pissed off and unhappy to participate, but boy, there's something about it. Anyway, my mother was an alcoholic and had borderline personality disorder, which if people don't know borderline personality disorder, it's something that's quite unpleasant to live with. Periodic rages and attacks and so on, unexpectedly. So there's all that weird kind of family stuff going on. And the therapist said either she or he, because she and I had a lot like this, more than my two brothers. He said either she or he has to get out of the house. So my dad said, Keith, let's go look at sports cars. I said, yeah, all right. So we got in our 54 Ford and stopped in front of the Wells Neuropsychiatric Clinic. And he opened the back, and there was a suitcase packed. I can still see it. And then we went, he said, you can just spend some time here. So they admitted me to this place, which was a nice enough place. It was sunshine, a ping pong table, an arts place. But every 3 or 4 days, they put me on a gurney and strap me down and give me Valium so that I wouldn't break my bones when I had the seizure, and do electroshock, which gives you a grand mal seizure, and you come out of that and you're not depressed and you're confused and you have some amnesia. They gave me 23 of those treatments over the next 6 weeks. Now, I was a little dazed and confused, of course, but at that place, I realized I need to change something. And the only 2 things that I'd seen that attracted me in the world were, one, I had gone to one karate class, and I was so freaked out, I went home. It was too violent, it was too scary. and 2, those therapy sessions. So I went, in retrospect, I wanted the archetypes of the warrior and the healer, and those were the closest I could find. And so I went, okay, I'm going to do that. So I got out, entered the karate class, started studying psychology in high school, went on to college. And 3.5 years later, I had my black belt in Shotokan karate. 10 years later, I had my first license. Now, as I was learning therapy in the late 60s and 70s, there was the humanistic psychology people, and there were the behaviorist people, and there were the psychoanalytic people. And remember, I am a visual spatial thinker. All those systems fit together to me, but they all yelled at each other and gave each other shit and didn't go to each other's conferences and all that other stuff. And it made for a lot of bizarre things. For instance, I went to an American Humanistic Psychology conference once in Isla Vista. And one of the first workshops was teaching everybody how to pick each other up and have anonymous sex. Then I went to a behaviorist conference, and everybody had these suits and these ties. And this one guy was talking about how if somebody is a transvestite, you have him put the clothes down and then, give himself some negative stimulus. It was just icky, okay? And the psychoanalysts were all arrogant and superior. Our thing works, even though we have no research to support it. I mean, the first statistically valid study on psychoanalysis was in 1965. Otto Kernberg did that, studying narcissism. But there were good things about all those systems that fit together. And also I had a warrior consciousness that I brought into my work. And also I started teaching other therapists how to do therapy, because I started being a peer counselor in 1973 and got my first license in 75 and started a counseling center with a guy that eventually went ahead and did Pacifica University. And I was training paraprofessionals and then professionals about half-time for 5 or 6 years, and wrote a couple of manuals and wanted to bring those two things together. Because one thing about martial arts is you're accessing energies outside yourself.
Mm.
We were sitting Zazen. I was sitting Zazen before and after every practice, starting at 15. And I could feel the same element of power in psychotherapy, the same need for clean boundaries, combined with all the other stuff. And so I was teaching that, the spirituality, the core power, the sensitivity, and the new systems. And I studied system after system after system after system. I thought there must be a system where you can just heal somebody. I mean, I really thought that in the 70s. I finally ended up studying with a Taoist priest, martial arts guy, who had this intense, dangerous system of body work. People would go into vibratory states and go back into traumas and dive in with them. And I studied that with him, became his apprentice, and martial arts also. So there's a lot of great martial arts stories and that kind of stuff around him. But one thing that did is it led me into my doctoral research was, all right, what form of therapy works better?
So just before going into the doctoral work, so the insight you just shared there, that the unifying theme to martial arts and to therapy is you're dealing with power systems, with power structures. And in that sense, the capacities and the internal resources of a martial artist will make you a more effective therapist, I imagine.
Absolutely. And weirdly, having deep understanding of people's interiors makes you a better martial artist.
Mm.
Martial artists are very peaceful. It would require an awful lot to have me do violence to another person. And so they're complementary systems. Miyamoto Musashi, in A Book of Five Rings, one of my favorite books, written in 1645. He was the preeminent samurai warrior in Japan at the time and wrote a book called A Book of Five Rings about his system. He said, a warrior needs to be proficient in all arts and do not think dishonestly. And I thought, well, do not think dishonestly, develop intuitive understanding of everything. That's very much what a therapist has to do, isn't it? And so I did my doctoral dissertation on what form of treatment has the most health-enhancing effects. And what my research showed me, and has been validated by many other studies, is that it didn't matter what form of treatment. What matters is that people were doing something they believed in, and people got healthier. And indeed, there have been meta-analysis that have done that says, if you want to analyze the variance of change with helping and coaching, about 40% of it is client variables. Do they have friends? Do they receive influence? Do they have some resources? 30% of it is the quality of the relationship. 15% of it is placebo. You give somebody a lot of money, they expect to get better, they'll get better. And 15% of it is method of treatment. Now, that's not insignificant, but it's not the overwhelming factor. And so at that point, in my teaching and even in my writing, I began to say to therapists, learn systems, but what you're doing is developing a natural healing style. And if you're working with me, I'm interested in helping you develop that and enhancing that. And that's been an organizing principle of my work ever since.
And that insight about belief, which is that what matters is that you believe the approach and the system, I imagine is both ways. Well, the client must believe that they are inside an ecology where they're going to find help. And part of what enables them to believe that is that they work with a person that completely or fully believe in what they're bringing to the table, and that there is no cynicism about them. That is part of the conductive power of actually transferring or inviting a person to believe in the approach that they are engaged.
That's exactly right. And if you're like most therapists and you learn multiple approaches, as I did and still do, whatever one you're bringing to bear, you believe in that one. But say that's not working and somebody directs you to another system. Great. Embody that system and believe in 100% in that one. There is an article on second tier functioning. We can discuss what that means later on. But one of the characteristics of second tier functioning is being able to change direction at vast speeds. Okay? And so therapy is like that. You need to be able to do a right turn going 90 miles an hour. And that's fun. That makes therapy exciting most of the time. And so that led me into, these insights were so seminal to me that I started writing books then.
Well, so the first two books you wrote, unpublished books, were Think Always of the Healing and Teaching People How to Love. What are the big ideas you are sharing and exploring in these initial two books?
Think Always of the Healing is taken from a phrase from Miyamoto's Book of Five Rings, where he said, think always of the cutting, because he was a sword fencer. He fought with two swords. And he said, learn all the five sword attitudes, learn all the systems. And he said, now forget all the five sword attitudes, forget all the systems. And when you engage with your opponent, think always of the cutting. Well, psychotherapy, learn a lot of systems, but then when you engage with your client, think always of the healing. And there's a way to progress in an orderly manner in terms of training yourself to be able to do that. Remember, I've been training psychotherapists for 6 years at this particular point, going on 7, and I had a lot of ideas about that. So that was the first book. The second book came from a realization that I had early in my career that everything is relationships. Psychoanalysis, particularly Freudian psychoanalysis, and to a certain extent Jungian psychoanalysis, underplayed this. Adlerian didn't as much. And the psychoanalysts that came in the 40s and 50s and 60s increasingly recognized we exist, we're born in relationships, conceived in relationships, exist in relationships, grow in relationships. And so the better those relationships are, the better we do. And of course, the number one relationship that's associated with happiness is the primary relationship. And by that time, I'd been working with couples for a number of years. And I wrote a book called Teaching People How to Love, which was a series of ideas and principles taken from my current understanding at that time of development and of relationship. And then how in the fabric of a therapy session to take incidences that the couples bring in and turn that into more love with each other. I submitted those to some publishers who weren't interested in publishing a book with me at the time. I wasn't affiliated with anybody. So I put them on the shelf, but recently looked at them again when I was getting ready for this. And I was very pleased. I went, boy, that stuff really, really lines up with modern research, which made me feel good about my intuition at the time. And I was writing a third book called The Master Therapist, about going to a place of mastery where it's alive and where you're feeling an ongoing sense of connection with the other world during your work, which I discovered was not just characteristic of my work, but the therapists that I most admired. And I was about halfway through that book when my son was born.
Mm.
And that night, I stopped writing and really didn't seriously write or teach much. I taught some classes at Santa Barbara Adult Edge until he went away to college 17 years later. My daughter was 14 at that time. And at that, I just realized I could not do my therapy and support my family and build the house that we needed to live in and raise my children and all that other stuff. I couldn't do all that stuff at once. So what got sacrificed was my teaching and my writing. And so I still studied, still learned a lot of stuff.
Well, you probably had a chance to go through what I describe as the ensoulment journey of needing to learn to embody so much of what you were teaching, and what you mentally traveled to, you needed now to build an embodied practice in raising your family. And I imagine that leads to the development and discovery that occurs later into the 90s, when you later expand your work. And I think the next book you write after that is Integral Sex Therapy. And so catch us in what evolved through the 90s and what shapes that body of work.
Well, moving forward with my family, first of all, I'd done family therapy before I had children, which is embarrassing to me now.
Right.
Not much, but I was an okay family therapist. But having kids, I went, wow, I changed. I changed the night my son was born. And I remember going to a samurai movie a couple of weeks after he was born, and I walked out. Even though I knew they were actors, I couldn't stand seeing all those young men getting killed. It really changed me. Anyway, so as we were doing all this stuff, and I was doing my work, every once in a while I'd run into a knot in my work. And I go, and I would follow it. And there would be somebody that had some system that would unravel that knot. So I'd study them. I'd buy the books, study them, embody the work, sometimes teach it. And I did that for years and years and years. I did that with sex therapy. I was somewhat put off by the sex therapy field. I was certified as a sex therapist in 1979, I think, 78. So, okay. And so I began to feel like an outlier, that there were people that had the body, mind, spirit, and self-culture and nature ideas that I had. And that was fine. But, it's somewhat isolated. Until in the 90s, I hit David Data and Ken Wilber. Okay, which profoundly blew my mind. David Data's work on the masculine and feminine was the best work I'd ever seen in that area. And when I applied it to the psychotherapeutic stuff that I knew, it really, really amped it up. And then he was good friends with Wilber. So, my wife she brings these things into the house. So we brought, I think it was a brief history of everything, which pissed me off. What, I have to learn a language? I have to learn all his terms? Screw that. And she says, no, just listen to this tape that I have of him, of somebody reading this book. I went, all right. We had a thing on Fridays where we would listen to, we'd study together, and then we'd make love, like inside is just like foreplay to my wife. It's really great. Anyway,
she was the spiritual pilgrim even before, ahead of you, or
always. She brought me my best teachers, starting in the 70s. And then 80s. She just bring me this David Data tape. I go, really? And then bam. And then all of a sudden I'm in the Omega Institute in a workshop with David Data for 3 years. Eventually wrote in one of my books a lot about his system and sent it to him. He said, well, yeah, you got it. That's it. Anyway, we were doing this, and the integral system is a psychoactive system. When you learn it, you're not walking through the same world anymore. My world changed tremendously. And it expanded my knowledge of psychotherapy to an enormous extent. And so I wrote a monograph, 70-page monograph on integral sex therapy. I did a ground rounds at the local hospital on integral sex therapy, went to the first integral psychotherapy conference in Boulder, and met Jeff Salzman for the first time, met Ken and stuff. And in the last night, they said, the books are yet to be written. I went, oh, okay. So I went home and wrote a 450-page book on integral psychotherapy. It took me about 18 months. And then I sent it to them. Sent it to one of the people at this institute who was kind of put off by it. She goes, what's this? Who are you? I went, oh God, maybe I need some social referencing skills. So what I did is I got into therapy with Patricia Albert. She was my counselor, and started the Evolutionary Collective. I was one of the people who started the Evolutionary Collective. I was one of the original members of the Evolutionary Collective, because I knew that there's some part of me that needed to grow to be able to transmit this stuff. And when I started doing that, then a local organization, Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, that was focused on somatic systems, asked me to come teach. And okay, so now I was in therapy, I was doing this. And then I began to see areas of the field that I had ignored, like for instance, interpersonal neurobiology, and areas of the field where I could contribute. When I discovered interpersonal neurobiology, I went, oh my God, there's like 15 years of research I'm not aware of. So I spent 2 years studying it, bought the books. Every week, every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I'd be going through my interpersonal neurobiology books and studying and connecting.
What do you believe is the core impulse driving you through this? Is it the search for truth about how things work? Is it the search for impact about what gets impact, or is it some combination of both, or is it another spiritual impulse altogether? How would you describe that impulse in you?
Well, part of it is ego.
Okay, great.
Just ego. This is so great and so obvious, and I enjoy teaching. And when I taught, people really enjoyed hearing about it. That was very gratifying. So part of it was just ego. But most of it wasn't. Most of it was, to the extent you understand the secrets of the universe and don't share them, you suffer. I was distressed not sharing this stuff. Santa Barbara Graduate Institute said, look, we believe in your stuff. We will create Santa Barbara Institute Publishing if you help us to publish your first 4 books as part of that. I went, sure. And that's how the Attuned Family and the Gift of Shame and Waking Up, Psychotherapy as Art, Spirituality, and Science, which is about integral psychotherapy, and its companion volume sessions, all 4 of those were published at that time.
Well, so take us through these 4 books and give us a bit of the big idea, or the core essence of each of those 4 books.
The essence of Waking Up was, if you are integrally informed and you're a psychotherapist, here what happens is you discover that you have a healing cosmology. And if it's integrally informed, there's a lot of things that are similar than other integrally informed people, but it's unique with each person. And so Waking Up was me describing the integral psychotherapy cosmology that emerged from me, from that awakening. And included in it were techniques and principles that could be practically applied in psychotherapy sessions. It always bothered me that people write about therapy, particularly the object relations people, and it's very, very dense and very, very impractical. And how does that help somebody in a session? So that book is filled with examples of therapists and clients, and the subtext is what's going on in the interior of the therapist. Oh, there's a flush of anxiety. That might mean this. Oh, there's a flush of anger. That might mean this. Oh, there's a flush of desire. Oh, that might mean this.
How did you write this? Did you use your own sessions to narrate the interior experience and the exterior and mirror them one next to the other?
After disguising people so that they were unrecognizable. And also, I knew this was such a major effort that my unconscious was harnessed. And so I would dream about the material, God, almost every night for the first 14 months. And then I'd wake up and write down a couple of notes. And then that would lend itself to the material. And then I hired an editor to help me make it more comprehensible and better, and ended up having, like, I don't know, 52 chapters and it had, it had sex therapy, it had couples counseling. It was designed to be, and it's beautiful. The people who've read it said, my God, this is one of the best things on psychotherapy I've ever read. Not many people have read it, but people who have liked it a lot. Then I thought, okay, well, maybe I need something that's more for the popular press. And so I wrote Sessions, All Psychotherapy is Relationships Integrating Towards Unity. And what that started out with a guy and his wife, and he cheated on her and she found out about it. And then they had 2 kids. And so it was a book that followed that experience, and they all got into therapy. So it followed the therapy with the lover, the therapy with the guy, the therapy with the woman, the couples work, the therapy with the kids, the family therapy. It followed it for a year after that revelation, towards an endpoint where everybody was doing pretty well a year later. And that was Sessions. And to this day, when people are trying to get me to hire them to promote books, they'll say, you have this book Sessions, why don't you hire us to promote it? Because,
well, did you ever consider selling it to Hollywood as a script material?
It's funny you should say that. I've had a couple of brushes with that environment. One was somebody who thought that I would be really good on TV. So she had me go and take pictures and interview some people and stuff. That didn't go anywhere. And then there were these people that I think it was called Pink Sneakers, who saw one of my videos, Therapists in the Wild. And they asked me to come take a meeting to do some kind of Therapists in the Wild reality show, which was, of course, completely bogus. Those are my 2 connections. Oh yeah, and then a third woman wanted to do a TV show on doing sex therapy with older people, with people in their 60s and 70s, which I've done a lot of that, and it went pretty well until I said, I'm not going to drive to LA and film this. You guys are going to have to film it up here because I hate driving to Los Angeles. I mean, maybe I was being too picky, but those are my 3 encounters with people thinking that they could put me on some show, and didn't work out, but that they all happened.
Yes. Well, so picking up the storyline, there is still the attuned family and the gift of shame, and I'm curious if you can describe some of what emerged in this body of work, specifically the gift of shame. I'm curious if it's about the shame, or it's about the fear of shame that's driving us, and it's just weave, please, this in the story.
Start with the attuned family. I was entranced with interpersonal neurobiology. People at Integral didn't know about the interpersonal neurobiological research, but I did. And when you added it to all the other stuff, it just brought you beneath the metaphors. I mean, I was tired of 20th century metaphors. I wanted to know what was really going on in people's brains and bodies, and how that went all the way up through the adaptive unconscious, through our connection with other people, through spiritual awareness, and so on. And so I was teaching this class for Santa Barbara Graduate Institute on family systems, family therapies. And I was dissatisfied with the textbooks. They just weren't practical. It was this potpourri approach that really wasn't useful as far as I was concerned for students. And so I was kind of having to teach away from the material towards the more central aspects that are practical to clinicians. And so I realized there's an organizing principle. Attunement is being aware with acceptance and carrying intent. This is attunement to yourself. Being aware with acceptance and carrying intent of breath, sensation, emotion, thought, judgment, and desire. Now, if you do a progression of starting with awareness of breath, with acceptance and caring intent, it leads you naturally to sensation, which leads you naturally up to desire. And this is attuning to myself. It was central, obviously, to me, to all the contemplative practices and to therapists, because to a therapist, psychotherapist, your body is an instrument. It's like an instrument panel. And there are perceptual systems that you develop that are like sense organs, like sight, only it's energy. It's how somebody feels. It's how you feel. And because you're always connected in an intersubjective field, you reading that in yourself guides you through the sessions, just like reading it in your client, because we can be attuned to another person by centering in ourselves and then being aware with acceptance and caring intent of, what is Aviv sensing in his body? What's Aviv feeling emotionally? What's Aviv thinking now? What are the thoughts going in and out? And how's he processing them? What are the judgments that Aviv has? What is the desires that Aviv have at this moment? Being aware of that with acceptance and caring intent is me attuning to you. And if I'm a parent, I'm doing that with my child. If I'm a husband, I'm doing it with my wife. If I'm a wife, I'm doing it with my husband. And so the attuned family is a couple that learn how to do this with everybody. And indeed, people do this with each other, good things happen. And that leads naturally into all the other interventions and techniques and hierarchical family therapy, which is one of my favorites, on and on and on. But you start with that core experience. And if you're in that core experience, good things are going to happen.
So you loved the theories, but you loved even more, and you were more passionate about what will get the work done and what will actually heal and produce results.
Oh yeah, yes. My favorite superpower. If I could have one superpower, it would be this one: put my hand out to someone. I don't even have to touch them, and heal them from whatever their wound is, psychological, emotional, spiritual. That always brings tears to my eyes. That's superpower I want. Can't have it, but I can move in that direction. And that was the attuned family. But as I was studying neurobiology, developmental neurobiology, Alan Shore is the guy who was really the first. Him and Dan Siegel wrote the first couple of books. I went to a number of conferences where they presented. Actually, Alan Shore and I were in an elevator once, and we got so into talking to each other. I gave him a copy of a book that I wrote, inspired by him, that we didn't leave the elevator.
Did you go up and down in the conversation?
No, we were just so into it that it was a shock when. Anyway, so as I looked at it, I realized that when a kid, and this is the research I was seeing, Freud always said that we developed the defenses in response to anxiety. It had been accepted that defensive states were developed by children in response to anxiety they had about different things, and then they would correct the anxiety to all the defenses: projection, projective identification, denial, repression, suppression, all that stuff. Well, as I was looking at the research, that's not the way it worked. As a matter of fact, around 10 and 11 months, several things happen with a human infant. One, they can begin to walk a little bit. Two, they can feel a difference enough between mom and them that with their distress, they go to mom to get externally regulated. And three, they can begin to experience shame emotions. They can be disapproved of, and they can blush and look down and have the shame reaction, the muscles getting weaker. Kids younger than 10 months don't have that. There's not enough separate sense of self to have a shame emotion. Now, when a human infant between 10 and 17 months hears the word no every 9 minutes when they're awake. And those no's create, those little disapprovals create these little bubbles of shame, and it freezes them. You say no to a kid with that now, they don't have language, but you see that'll freeze a kid at 30 feet. And you can see the survival characteristic of this in a hunter-gatherer group. You know, the 3-year-old's going over next to the steak. You go, stop, no. And they freeze. They look down, muscles get weak, face gets limp. And they look at their parent as if they're a stranger. It's distressing for a child. But then the parent comes and picks the kid up and says, hey, no, this is fine. Just don't go step on snakes. The kid goes, no, all right. And a securely attached kid will be back to happy, sympathetic arousal within 10 seconds. Shame is a parasympathetic affect. And so it was obvious to me that that dynamic was way more responsible for the development of the defenses and anxiety. Now, you were mentioning earlier that we have anxiety about shame. Yeah, we do. But remember, at about 2 years old, kids develop a theory of mind, meaning that they can relate to themselves as a thinking being. They can observe themselves. Well, those kids around between 2 and 3 can observe themselves breaking rules. And when they do, they feel a sense of shame. Shame becomes the interior guide to be socialized, to be virtuous and pro-social. And it continues that way throughout life. Now, we defend against it by denying it, looking away. Shame is literally the look away emotion. I get ashamed, you look away. You know, I'm talking about the shame family, shame, guilt, mortification. There's minor differences, but they're all basically the same. So as we develop that, we observe ourselves move through the world. And when we violate a value, our unconscious, our adaptive unconscious, which I call our shadow self, you and I had a great conversation about that, sends us shame and a story about us being bad. Now, we want to avoid that because it's painful. But if we don't avoid it, if we go, oh, I'm being bad, then I have choices. One, I can be good. I can stop doing the thing that's bad and then feel a sense of, that was good to stop doing the bad thing. 2, I can look at the value that I'm violating and I can change it. For instance, you tell a 7-year-old don't lie. Okay, and that's 7-year-olds have concrete operational thinking, black and white thinking. Don't lie as a really good standard. And so the kid lies, feels ashamed. I feel bad. What do you feel bad about? Well, I told Tommy that I couldn't go to his birthday party because I was sick, but I'm not sick. I just don't want to go to Tommy's party. So you feel bad about lying. So what do you think you should do? I think tell Tommy I don't want to go to the party and just be honest with him. Okay, well, do that. And then the kid feels better. Okay. But say you get 12, and Aunt Gilda comes and she has a horrible dress. How do I look at my dress? I think it looks horrible. And then she bursts into tears. So you tell the 12-year-old, sometimes this tell the truth thing is a relativistic thing. So when you're dealing with Aunt Hilda and, she thinks she looks horrible, but she says, how do I look? Sometimes it's better to lie a little bit and say, you look fine. Okay. Because that serves the highest good. Okay? So now the value has been expanded. It has been altered. Tell the truth all the time unless it's going to cause unnecessary suffering. Okay, our values are always evolving. We actually evolve through at least 4 moral systems that include and transcend each other. All of them, and at least 6 moral foundations. Jonathan Haidt's the guy who's done the research on that, which I love. And so all of them continue to evolve towards being more relativistic and more compassion-oriented. But in all of them, if we're violating one of them, we'll feel a shame emotion. That's the gift of shame.
Well, so for some, what you're describing as the gift of shame is integrated in the contemplation or strategic thinking in the context of regret minimization.
Okay.
What is it that I want to avoid doing, or what is it that I want to do such that I won't feel regret when I look from my deathbed back through my life? That exercise, and so I don't know if it's just, if this is integratable inside that consideration, but that it occurs to
Absolutely.
me. Yeah.
And part of the way that I do that with teenagers, in fact, this just happened. So this teenager, I said, look, you have a universe that you are constantly evoking. You have a universe, you're at the center of it, and how you go is how your universe goes. And so if you're going to do something, you want to ask yourself, do I want to have that memory in this universe? And that hit him. So
for me, right there, that's logotherapy by Viktor Frankl.
Well, yeah.
The idea that I can configure anything in my mind and look back from that back into myself. One of the logotherapy strategies that I use, I think of my granddaughter and think that she is 25 and looking backward, whether I'm still alive or not at that point, and looking backward, and she is seeing me in this moment. Will she be proud of me in this moment or not? And that is my guide. I know what I need to do if I had any doubt.
Well, first of all, we all love Viktor Frankl. And you know, there's something about that is somewhat of a shadow element of all of psychotherapy. You know, Viktor Frankl told his story once to, I don't know, thousands of psychologists, you know, and everybody just was moved. But I don't think that they realized that they were having a spiritual experience. They were connecting with something larger than themselves. That there was an energetic container created by him that they were sharing. And then that container was not just that moment. That's a container that they all, to some extent, created with their patients, their clients. And that you can increase the intensity and the power of that container by understanding it and welcoming that energy, just as he did. And it kept him alive in the concentration camp. And later on, it inspired us again and again and again. And yet, from the stage at conferences, people would be unwilling or unable to talk about that very real experience of channeling somehow that spiritual energy into the session, into the workshop, into the work that they were doing. And that, to me, that was a deficit in the field. So part of my job was to remedy that in each one of my books. There are articles, there are chapters on experiencing that spiritual container, generating it, and maintaining it. And speaking of the shame emotions, the way you maintain that container as a therapist is by living your principles, you know,
Yes.
by being in integrity. And so if you begin to drift off of that, you'll feel a little bit of shame. And that shame is a guide then to shift back into that spot, that spot of integrity.
Well, so I described what you are painting as the gift of shame, which, by the way, coming back to just the way you instantiated it with a teenager, by asking the question, would you want to create this memory in the universe? Beautiful, powerful way to invoke that. To me, what it brings to life is what conscience is. This is the presencing of conscience.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And Jiminy Cricket was pretty close. Jiminy Cricket was, I let your conscience be your guide. Well, that voice, that's compassionate self-observation. That's the fourth stage. And we have compassionate self-observation. Now, some of us have amplified shame. Some of us have shame spirals we go into. Some of us have shame attacks. And these things can be quite damaging on all kinds of levels. And they can be addressed working those four stages, for instance, and also by understanding, all right, if I'm ashamed, let me go to wherever the value is and either follow it, discard it, which is rare, or modify it, grow it, until it's more fitting with what I believe is beautiful, good, and true in the present moment. And this is how moral systems grow. And indeed, Kohlberg, who made some mistakes about his understandings of moral reasoning, funny guy, he thought that people kind of consciously did moral reasoning. That's not how people do moral reasoning. People have an immediate moral response and then rationalize it, unless they're aware of that, and then they can have true exploratory moral reasoning.
But what does it mean that people have an immediate moral response? It means there is some energetic form that is present with them, out of which they respond. So there is an operating system.
Huge. This is why I wrote my book on shadow. Okay.
Let actually, if we can stay in the trace and integrate here, because your next book, in the way of telling the story, is mindful manifestation, yearn, discern, and act to create daily miracles. So can you integrate that into the story? And then we need to attend to the 100 reasons.
Yeah. Well, now, mindful manifestation also was not published. But let's go back to finishing the Kohlberg story. Kohlberg eventually came up with a seventh stage. And the reason why he did is he observed people's moral reasoning and realized in that seventh stage, people were coming from a compassionate place, and their attitudes towards themselves and others was relativistic to a wide array of other variables. He essentially was coming from an integral level of consciousness. And I suspect as he grew as a man and as he studied, he saw more of that, and then had to add that seventh stage. Now, how did that fit into mindful manifestation?
What it activates for me is that you travel through most of the great teachers of the 20th century, each one of them in their model and framework, kind of towards the end of their life, they admit that there is another stage. Maslow is another, the self-transcendence. So this is the story of the evolutionary trajectory that's coming through, that current driving through the 20th into the 21st century.
Exactly. And why my work shifted when I had an integral awakening to supporting the evolution of consciousness. Because what all these people discovered is that there's always a next stage. They can feel it. Yeah, as you develop those interior sense organs, you can feel that next stage. And you're moving towards it. And if you work long enough, it begins to become clarified to you. And I'm very familiar up to turquoise at this point. And then I've had brief moments of violet, and we can describe what that is later on. So going back to the transition, at that particular time, I got very interested in a wide array of other healing modalities outside of psychotherapy. I was listening to tapes, theater of the mind, that kind of stuff, and reading books, some of the manifestation books. And it was very clear to me that all these systems were manifestation systems. Psychotherapy was a manifestation system. Coaching's a manifestation system. All change works, manifestation systems. I mean, what are they? Well, manifestation system is you discover you want something or you want a transformation. You imagine what it looks like in as much detail and feel it as if it's already happening. You commit to doing it, and you start taking steps every day, and you ask other people for help. You encounter problems along the way that make you want to stop or make you want to redirect. And you resolve those problems by asking for other people to help you and by moving through them yourself. And after a while, you have manifested something different, and you've changed along the process. You've transformed. And all the systems had that, the scientific-based systems, the spirit-based systems. You know, the people that just came out with something, the people that were studying the wisdom traditions. And so I thought that was very, very exciting and cool. It was an organizing principle. And so I wrote Mindful Manifestation.
And you also write at that time, or a little after it, Intimacy and Evolution? Yep.
Because in my teaching, I always started with everything's relationships. I mean, now the understanding is that humans are not just social, we're ultra social. But we're not just ultra social. We're social in a way that's unlike anything else in the known universe. And so you can trace back to the Big Bang, where there was one thing, and then bam, all of a sudden there were a lot of things. And the self-organizing principle of chaos theory came into the universe, along with gravity and electromagnetism, speed of light. And then all those things started relating, and they were all biased to getting more complex, and the more complex was more intimate, until finally it got to people relating with each other, you and me right now, which is the most intimate and most complex event in the known universe. I thought that was pretty beautiful, so I wrote a book about it called Intimacy and Evolution, again, unpublished. Didn't have a publisher at that particular time. Santa Barbara Institute had been sold and then disbanded. And then, to my great delight, I connected with Integral Publishers at the time. And I said, well, hey, I got these books. I got Intimacy, Evolution, and Mindful Manifestation. You want to publish them? And they go, no, we don't want to publish those. We want you to write a book on integral mindfulness. I went, sure, that sounds great. And so I wrote Integral Mindfulness, which taught the basic mindfulness techniques, the attunement technique that I've been teaching for years. And then, okay, now that you have compassionate awareness of yourself and other people, now what? We got to navigate the world. What's a great way to navigate the world? Well, if you have an integral understanding of the world, you have access to multiple perspectives. And at least in my cosmology, all of them have a healthier and a more healthy and less healthy way of being. You know, Bina Sharma does that with her polarity thinking. Here's the positive and the negative. I kind of translate that. I translate that in more healthy, less healthy. Okay? And so if you develop that basic mindfulness practice, and if you do have that understanding of more or less healthy, awareness regulates. To the extent that I'm aware that something's more or less healthy, I am already biased to go towards more healthy. Now, and on any given day, I'm not saying I make all my decisions based on the more healthy, but most of them I do. And integral mindfulness is what allows me to do that. And so that's what that book was about. And I was very excited about it. It was well received from people that read it. And it was fun working with Integral Publishers. Now, along those times, I was doing these podcasts, right? I was doing a podcast with Jeff Salzman called The Shrink and the Pundit. And a funny thing happened. I wanted to do a talk on shadow because I felt shadow was misunderstood. And Jeff said, yeah, let's do that. And I usually would do some notes and send them to him. But he had to postpone that talk 3 times. So by the time that we were doing the talk, I had 45 pages of notes. And I went, I think I need to write a book. And so I called Integral Publishers. They said, yeah, we'd love you to write a book on shadow. And so that's what I wrote, Shadow Light, Illuminations at the Edge of Darkness, which used my knowledge, my clinical knowledge, and also my studies, particularly of neurobiology, to take the metaphoric models of shadow from the 20th century and to make a more modern model that was more consistent with how brains actually worked.
And the realization of adaptive unconscious.
Adaptive unconscious is a term from neurobiology, which means that there's information processing going on constantly in our unconscious. And in response to the world, what our unconscious does is send us up states, sends us up memories. It sends us up impulses and material and feelings to guide us. It's doing that all the time. Now, and we catch that stuff a second, half second to a second and a half after. And so we move through a sausage of time, about 7 seconds. Consciousness moves in that sausage of 7 seconds. We're always following our unconscious half second, second and a half behind. Now, you can learn how to become aware of that material as it flows up. You can develop a sense organ, a psychological sense organ to be aware of it. And if you are aware of it, you'll notice that some of it is leading you to live a virtuous life and do healthy things. And some of that material is leading you to be defensive and sometimes counterproductive and unhealthy. And I call that constructive and destructive shadow. And if you're aware of that and can feel it and can sense it, then you can surrender to the constructive shadow states, and you can dialysize the destructive shadow states. So how come I'm feeling this sense of recoiling and lack of trust at this moment? What's going on? Well, if I look at myself and whoever I'm involved with, acceptance and caring intent, compassionate self-awareness, the 4th stage. Oh, I see. There's something else going on that requires an interior or exterior adjustment. Oh, I make that adjustment. And now it has the emotional signature of constructive shadow. I've just did a little transformation there. And this is super important because of defensive states. Our unconscious, when it feels threats, generates states that have certain characteristics. They have amplified or numbed emotions. They have distorted perspectives. They have destructive impulses, and they have diminished capacities for empathy and self-awareness. I'll give you an example. So say you look at me and you go, Keith, you're an asshole. Okay. And you say it like you mean it. So I am shocked. Part of me feels threatened. So my unconscious gives me a threat response. Uh-oh. It's fear, some anger, perhaps. I get them up with a distorted perspective. There's something dangerous about Aviv. This is just the state. This is before I've done anything with it. Dangerous guy, destructive impulse. Get out of here. Lack of empathy. There's no interest about why you might have said that. Lack of self-awareness. I'm not asking whether this is the best thing to do. I just want to get out. That's just the defensive state. What if I'm aware of that state? I go, whoa, that's strange. So I cultivate empathic attunement and self-awareness. And I don't do the destructive impulse. I don't go with the negative story. People, when they're angry at someone, tend to reduce that person to the thing they're angry about.
Yes.
Common problem is how we objectify and do violence to people. No, what's going on? Oh, I think I'll engage. Aviv has good communication skills. I think I'll engage him. What made you say that? And now I've dialyzed that defensive state in this pro-social, social engagement. And I've gotten not just a little wiser, I've gotten a little bit more intimate with you rather than alienated from you.
Okay, so let me see if I can walk through the. This is like a whole workshop in 5 minutes, but essentially you're saying, look, there is a thing called the adaptive unconscious, which is a memory system that continues to update itself, and it has these, and it has these this content that it brings to the surface, and depends on how you're wired on the inside. Some of it will lead you into constructive pathways where you become virtuous because you take that content and it leads you to a higher version, more evolved version, more integrated version, more compassionate version of yourself. In that sense, that shadow content is beautiful because it leads you to your greater potential, wonderful impetus into your development and self-evolution. And then there is the content that for one reason or another, experience, temperament, whatever, leads you to a different kind of reaction, regressive, not positive, not constructive. And you say you have the capacity to take that material, metabolize it, transmogrify it, use it as a teachable content to unlock your potential. And your guidance there is actually let your state, awareness and attunement capacity lead how you work with the content. Become attuned first to the state, and then by shifting the state, pivoting into curiosity, into empathy, into compassion, that enables you to rewire or transmogrify the energetic content that puts you in a position where you are more able to process the content and rewire the engagement with whatever situation you're in. How would you reframe or correct what I...
Exactly right. And that's what all therapists do, reading themselves, their own interior reactions as instruments. That's what all coaches do. You mentioned once you were doing a workshop. He says, I'm 24/7 at a workshop. I am dialed in. I am surrendered in service. Okay, so that's an area where basically Aviv slips away and there's just Aviv awareness and surrender to service. And so anything that happens in you at that point isn't going to get caught up in some egoic Aviv thing. It's going to get turned into making this a better workshop, helping people transform better, okay? And so that's what healers do. That's what particularly psychologically oriented healers and helpers do, and coaches. They do it naturally. And there's something that I can go in even a little further. There are fields that exist outside of us that can come through us.
Yeah.
Are flashes of insight. There are archetypal forms that are central to the human experience. They can come through us through dreams and through ideas and through flashes of insight, downloads. And I believe that we access those when we surrender ourselves to service, when we surrender ourselves to the beautiful, good, and true.
And they can show up in the interpersonal space, right, as we speak, as we explore here today. Well, yes. we still have to integrate into the story the point where you write 100 reasons to not have a secret affair. I may be able to contribute the reason 101, maybe not, we'll see in a minute. But before actually describing what you wrote in this book, since we are visiting this, what is the research saying about what are the main reasons as to why people have an affair?
Well, okay, so first of all, let me describe. The title came from this guy wanted to have a secret affair on his wife. And so I was telling him in the session, this is a bad idea. So at the end of the session, he was scheduled his next appointment, and he said, so really, why is it a bad idea for me to have a secret affair? I said, there's 100 reasons to not have a secret affair. He said, that's a good book title. Okay, and so Patricia Albero's working, she says, yeah, that's a good book title. I thought, yeah, maybe I will write that book. And so that's how the book began. And there's a great book by Esther Perel that she wrote 4 or 5 years later called State of Affairs, which is just an outstanding book about affairs. So one thing is 25 to 45% of men and 15 to 25% of women will cheat on their spouse. Okay, so that's just the statistics. And there's about 3% of animals.
You're using the word cheat factually, not as a judgmental, not as a value judgment.
Cheat. Yeah. I'm using it infidelity. They will be unfaithful. They will be sexually unfaithful. 25 to 45% of guys, 15 to 25% of women will be unfaithful at some point in their marriage. 3% of animals are pair bond animals. We're pair bond species. And all of them cheat whenever they have a chance. Okay. All of the animals that are pair bond, they'll cheat when they have a chance. The significant thing about the statistic I just gave isn't that 25 to 45% of men cheat. It's that 55 to 75% of men don't cheat. It isn't that 15 to 25% of women cheat. It's 75 to 85% of women are not unfaithful. And we can assume that they all had opportunity, or most of them had opportunities. That's a staggering statistic. Now, that being said, the rate of fidelity that we have in the current culture is about the same as they have in hunter-gatherer groups. Now, why is that? Well, hunter-gatherer groups tend to be egalitarian. They tend to not have dominance hierarchies. There's some evidence that for 10,000 years, not 10,000 years, probably closer to 1 million years, that in human groups, if any alpha was trying to dominate by bullying, like chimpanzees, there's alpha chimpanzees, but they bully, they don't lead. That, there was enough guys around with spears, betas with spears, who wouldn't let somebody do that. And so the form of a tribe was prevented from having red power gods for most of human history. I mean, the whole concept of somebody getting together an army and them doing everything that he said, that's basically 10,000 years old. Just didn't seem to happen before with these small groups. They couldn't compete. An egalitarian group where they're all cooperating with each other is going to outcompete some group where some guy is terrorizing everybody to do what he wants. And I'm saying a guy for obvious reasons, testosterone, dominance, that kind of stuff. And so that's just, that's the nature of social environments. It's about the same level of cheating. Now, why is this thing that happened, this cheating thing? Because we have a lot of sex drives. We don't just have one. First of all, we have the pair bond sex drive. The pair bond sex drive started about 5 to 7 million years ago when people came out of the trees and the savannas. And a woman could not like pick up a 3-year-old and run effectively and couldn't jump into the trees. And so she needed a guy out who would die for them. And that's the pair bond. And if you look in cultures, generally relationships are pretty stable for the first 3 or 4 years. Basically enough time for a woman to raise a kid so the kid could be running around taking care of themselves a little bit in their tribe. And that's when divorces peak, 4 years into a marriage, to this day. But also, if you found an attractive other, if you were a guy, and you had sex with her, your genes were more likely to get passed on. So guys were programmed to cheat. Women, if she found a powerful or attractive or competent other guy, she could make a bond with him by having sex with him, and she'd have another ally for her in the tribe. So we're motivated to cheat. But we don't like that as pair bond people. So if we see one of our partners looking at somebody else or potentially cheating, we get pissed off. Here's another sex drive: jealousy. Over 25% of the murders in this country are love triangles. Jealousy is a powerful sex drive. So all these sex drives happen, and now there's another one. People meet each other, and there's a polarity between a masculine and a feminine energy source, mostly men and women, not always. They get attracted, and when you get attracted, your nervous system starts talking you into having sex now. Okay, talking you into having sex now is pretty great. Okay? And if you're not affiliated with other people, then fine, nobody's cheating on anybody. But as you do that, and have sex now and that kind of stuff, sometimes you fall in love, which is a physiological event where 11 hormone systems all change for 9 to 18 months. And now you're intoxicated with this person, and you want to talk to them all the time, and you want to be around them. And if that happens with somebody at work, and you have a wife at home where you have intimate bonding with that wife, or a husband at home, you have intimate bonding with that husband, they don't look nearly as attractive as this new person that all of a sudden you have this event with. And it comes suddenly. People can have sex and not have this. People can hang out with each other and not have this, and then wake up one day and there it is. It burns itself out 9 months to 18 months normally. And then people enter what's called intimate bonding, where they begin to feel very close, but less sexually urgent, less, more like family with each other. And at that point, the family of origin defenses, which started when they were little kids with shame dynamics and all this other stuff, starts showing up. And then the couple has to deal with that, for better or for worse. If they deal with it for better, with their friendship and their love affair and their ability to solve problems, they can maintain some level of that love affair indefinitely. My wife and I still have that with each other. We've been together 50 years, but it required an intentional love affair for us to do that. It didn't just naturally happen. We had to, make it happen, which we do, and I teach other people.
Activate it.
Yeah, activate and keep it activated. And so in the midst of that, so in the midst of having a pair bond, therefore, if you're just going with the drives, you could go have casual sex with somebody that you had felt polarity with. You could fall in love with another person, and you could still value your family, okay? Which is probably where these multiple wife things came from. Remember, when with agriculture 10,000 years ago, people could stockpile wealth. And so men started stockpiling women. And that's where multiple wives came from. And women became essentially property. And that's the patriarchy. And I'm sorry, I didn't do it. But it really was a real mess for the last 10,000 years. And it'll probably be another 100 years before we completely untangle it. And God, I wish Hillary would have been president.
Well, so let me just throw do we have the time to extend this a little bit? Because I want to throw
Sure, I can go as long as you want.
Let me just throw 2 or 3 more things into this equation. Where do you put in, as we said, the portal's inquiry is about how are we, as a species, how are we evolving? And so there is a question, which is, would you say that evolutionarily, monogamy is the only or the best or the optimal operating system to facilitate a human well-being and people thriving in the future? And so where do you put inside this context polyamory as an approach? And I just listened to few of them in conversations. I have a couple of superficial observations that I'll run by you so you can tell me whether the research and the data confirms or disprove it. But I'm interested in the macro equation that you're describing about human development and evolution. What I noticed in those conversations were, number one, they say that they live a more exciting and thrilling life. I don't know if it's true, but they say that they are living a more thrilling life. Number two, there is a sense that most people are not truly able to transcend those jealousy impulses and find a development that can contain all that. And number three, it appears that for many, not for perhaps everybody, but for many, choosing this lifestyle, it becomes a job. Like that's what they think about all the time. People are preoccupied most of the time with somewhere in the processing, well, who will I have sex with and when? And that becomes like their job. And if your creative capacity is dedicated to that inquiry, there is a trade-off, because you probably cannot then channel that same creativity to something else. I know somebody will correct me and say, no, you get it completely wrong. Actually, that's how they unlock their creativity. But please, doctor, where would you place this? Where would you place this in the bigger cosmology of the human experience? And again, we are describing economic conditions, social conditions where people are now pushing the envelope of the paradigms of living together. I'll just throw one other thing there for you to address all of it. There are people that believe that the next phase is about new forms of families. Let's just say 2 men and 3 women, or where they create crews or teams or tribes or any other pods, and they make that a contractual family, and they raise several kids. So all those experimentations are currently emerging in the human experience. Can you put all of this a little bit in context for me, please?
Well, first of all, human beings are the species that takes the drives and turns them into art. So we're taking the sex drives and we're turning them into art. And so, sure, I've known people to be happily polyamorous. I've known people to create alternative structures with their families, and so on. And also, I believe that if you're in a society that doesn't crunch you down sexually, which, American society basically did until the 60s. And, in the 60s, in the 60s, it was embarrassing if you didn't want to have sex with somebody you went out with. What's wrong with you? It was like that. It was a different culture, the counterculture. So developmentally, when people are in a non-repressive society, a lot of people want to go through a polyamorous stage. I certainly did. My wife and I got together in 73, and we weren't monogamous until 81. Now, the difference between polyamory and infidelity is you don't lie about anything. There's a saying in the polyamory community: swingers have sex and polyamory people talk about sex. And so, yeah. And it's a lot of our conversations about the titillating polyamory stuff. And it is titillating, and people do have alternative forms. That being said, the research overwhelmingly shows something different for people as a whole. And here's what the research shows. Having a secure primary relationship where you're taking care of your friendship and your love affair and you're resolving issues with each other leads to the happiest, healthiest humans and families. Again and again and again. And the quality and depth of love that you have with somebody that is your primary person in that relationship, the quality of that connection, the depth of that connection is unqualifiable to somebody who hasn't had the experience. I've written a couple articles called Post-Issue Relationships about couples that are so good at resolving issues that basically they don't have issues. That something comes up and they just help each other out, and they take care of their friendship, they take care of their love affair, and they take care of resolving issues. That seems to be the climax for us, so to speak, of human relationships. Now, that being said, couples don't exist independent of other social networks. So if you're a couple and you don't have other social networks around, you suffer. During the pandemic, my wife especially suffered around us having not as many social networks. I didn't. I was engaged in intimate contact with my clients all week long. And then I was with my wife exclusively Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which is my rhythm. Two of the happiest years of my life was during the pandemic. But my wife didn't have the social contact that she needed as much. And so she suffered more around that. And so to the polyamory people I work with, I'll help them have happier polyamory. To the people that have been betrayed, I'll help them work their way through sexual betrayal. Wherever a person wants to grow, there's healthier and unhealthier ways of doing it, and there's advantages and disadvantages. I don't think that there's another stage, a polyamorous stage, that humans are going to go to where it becomes a very, very common form. But there'll be those alternatives that'll keep on being normalized, and that's great. I mean, it's like gender. There should be 50 genders. Instead, there's only 2 or 3. Okay, well, now we know that someone has their own unique gender. Maybe somebody is primarily a straight top, but secondarily a gay bottom, but on occasion, there's something else. Okay, that's a gender. Okay, but how do you in a society that accepts that, then there's forms that those will take with different people.
To just not lose the line we are on there in the inquiry. So is the emphasis in the title, 100 Reasons to Not Have a Secret Affair, is the emphasis on not have an affair or not have a secret affair?
A secret affair. Secret affair is a betrayal. You have sex with somebody else, and then your partner, your husband finds out about it, or you tell him about it or something. That person will feel betrayed. And not only that, the universe that couple has had, that hadn't had sexual betrayal in it, now it has sexual betrayal. And 10 years later, he's 3 hours late coming home and lost his phone. She's going to worry about it. But if 10 years later they didn't have that event, she wouldn't be worrying about a secret affair. She'd be worrying about whether he's okay or not. This goes back to the thing that when I talked about that kid. Do you want to have sexual betrayal in your shared universe with your partner? And the answer is, you don't want to have that.
I knew we were going to explore this today. So yesterday I asked ChatGPT-4 in preparation. I asked the tool to look into the entire 100 years history of Hollywood and looked at all the movie script written. And I said, could you give me please the ratio? How many of the stories are about falling in love or of falling out of love? And how many are about enduring, sustained, thriving love? Well, the ChatGPT-4 is not good yet to solve that conundrum. It's good to write a press release about something. So it didn't give me an answer. But if you needed to guess, what would be the ratio that you guess? My guess is, I would say for every 100 stories of falling in love or falling out of love, you maybe have 2 or 3 or 4, or maybe less, stories that describe enduring, sustained love. So in terms of the stories the culture brings and exposes us to, that is how I imagine the ratio is. How would you describe, what do you believe the ratio is?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the difference between drama and solving problems. Okay. Solving problems is people have a problem and they solve it. They help each other. So if there's just a movie about a couple of people just solving problems, not very entertaining. Now let's look at drama. Drama is, somebody feels powerless and victimized. Somebody is persecuting them. Now that person's rescuing them. Now the person is rescuing somebody else. Now the person's being persecuted for somebody else. So, you didn't go to Titanic for the plot. The boat's going to sink. I don't want to ruin it for you that the boat's going to sink. You went for the feelings that arose out of the drama. And the drama was people on that triangle. That's interesting. If you're going to do a retweet of a tweet or something, and for every moral word you put in that, for every emotional word you put in that, the amount of virality goes up 20%. So as humans, we're fascinated with people screwing each other over and dealing with it. Fascinating with that drama triangle. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. As human beings, in terms of living a good life, well, you know what? We want to be in a non-drama life where people around us aren't betraying us, we're not betraying them, and we're cooperating with each other. And people prefer to share and care and be fair with each other if they're unobstructed. You see that again and again. If there's plenty of food and there's nobody oppressing anybody, people prefer to share with each other, care for each other, be fair with each other. That certainly fits with the moral foundation theory. Fairness and unfairness and care and harm are two of the two moral foundations that conservatives and progressives share with equal intensity. Okay? And so, yes, we look at the dramas and we're all excited by the dramas. When we're talking about a real life, in a real life, we don't want that. We want to be in harmony. You know, in martial arts, I can't watch some movies, and not because, you know, of the thing when my son was born. Anybody who's ever taken a shot, you know, you take one shot to your face, or you get your nose broken. That's a significant event. And if somebody did it because they're pissed off at you, that's horrific. I mean, you remember it forever. Okay. Violence is like that. And so they have these shows where people like hit each other like 20,000 times and nothing happens. And they have a little cut, you know, in the next scene. That's not how it really works. You know, humans hate that. They hate violence. They hate being the recipient. It's tremendously difficult. And the form of it matters. You know, taking a shot on the practice floor in a karate studio is way different than taking a shot in a bar where somebody all of a sudden hits you. The intent matters. That's drama. Drama makes for interesting stories. They make for unhappy lives.
Yes. Well, so let me just pursue this one more step with the idea of happy life. What are, based on the research, what are the 2 or 3 most critical, essential elements of a thriving, enduring love?
The Norg study out of Chicago asks these questions. Number one thing is your primary relationship. If that's going well, that's pretty good. Then it's relationships with friends and family. Then it's having work that's satisfying to you and leaves you financially secure in some way. Then it's having a spiritual orientation. And then it's having an assembly, you know, a spiritual assembly that you're part of. Those 5 things are consistently in that order associated with happiness.
And about happy relationship, what are the 2 or 3 critical elements that discovered by the research in terms of holding the relationship vibrantly alive? You described that you and your wife decided to cultivate, to make it so that you will still be thriving at this point. What are if you reverse engineer your success, what are
if you reverse engineer our success with each other, it tracks with the best social research that's been done on this, which is by John Gottman and his group up in Seattle. And it's pretty straightforward. You know, a couple that cherish each other and are grateful for each other tend to do great. Okay. If they cherish each other and are grateful for each other, and they put attention into their friendship and their love affair, intentional positive into their friendship and their love affair, and in their ability to resolve, to heal injuries, they do great. They are the masters of intimacy, and they describe themselves as happy, and they're happier and they're healthier. In one study, having a good relationship, this was a study, I think, in Sweden. Having a good relationship was more predictive of health than whether people smoked or not, whether people were obese or not. Okay, it has that much power. And it's those things. Now, if people make negative comparisons and they focus on nurturing resentments, that tends to lead them to a cascading series of events that leads to betrayal or desertion. And that data is just pretty consistent again and again and again and again and again. So we know what it looks like. Okay? And we know there's a lot of forces in the world that move us towards that and forces that compromise that. And so part of my job with my clients is to have them be outliers. I want them to be healthier than the norm. I want them to be more intimate than the norm. I want them to have better sex than the norm. I want them to be better friends. I want them to resolve issues way better than the norm. People go, I want to be normal. I go, I'm not in the business of helping people be normal. Normal is a statistical thing that is inadequate for me to describe a happy life. I want my people that I work with, that I teach, to be abnormally happy, abnormally intimate, abnormally fulfilled, and abnormally healthy.
I want to explore two final areas before we come to landing. The first is the broadest sense of humanity, and then explore next generations, Gen Z, and so on and so forth. If humanity is a person walking into your clinic, where do you begin the conversation? Where do you begin in that work? If humanity was the person that walked into the clinic?
Well, first of all, I congratulate humanity on how well they've grown. Doing a good job, humanity. And now you have challenges. And so what are the challenges, and where do you want to start resolving them? And you can't just resolve them one at a time, because all the problems that are affecting humanity are wicked problems with multiple sources. So let's just start with what facet of moving forward would you like, given all the capacities that you've developed over 7 million years of evolution. For instance, whenever there's a happiness class in colleges, it's oversubscribed. Why not have happiness classes in elementary school and high school and in every college? That would really help things out. That would lead us into a lot of different directions. That would be something that would move humanity forward a little bit. I would encourage humanity to develop compassionate self-awareness. Where are you falling short? Well, humanity has a vulnerability, doesn't it, to mass formation psychosis. But if enough people feel anxious and dissatisfied and vaguely angry and don't know why, and the world doesn't make sense to them, they're vulnerable to an ideology arising that says there's an enemy, let's go attack that enemy, we'll feel better. And then a leader will arise out of that ideology that will guide people, and we'll tend to forgive that leader from all the excesses. Trump is a good example of that. Putin's another good example of that. Well, humanity, that's a destructive shadow capacity that, if you're not aware of it, it's going to cause more problems, as it already has for many, many centuries. Let's look at that. Let's look at the fact that we no longer, as humanity, are just existing in this world, this biosphere. We are the biosphere. Okay, I am nature. How I take care of the world will be how the biosphere goes in this world. So right now, human beings are nature. We will determine where nature will go. And right now, we're dealing with nature irresponsibly in a lot of ways, and responsibly in other ways. So I would say, as nature, let's guide this world to a sustainable future on every level. And then I'd say, there's something so beautiful about consciousness. There's something so beautiful about development. Let's recognize the magic of that, and realize what's on the horizon. Eventually, this world is going to be a place where people are taking care of themselves and the biosphere. Eventually, human consciousness is going to spread to other stars. Eventually, there will be no slavery on this planet. Eventually, the levels of oppression will be even less than they are now. And even now, in the midst of all this crap that's going on, there's less poverty, less starvation, more democracy. It's an amazing thing.
And please integrate into it in a closing comment the concerns and the hopes you have for younger generations, because they seem to be troubled, and at the same time they bring enormous creative potential. So how would you speak to the Gen Zs and the people following?
Yeah, Gen Z is another form called the iGen. Gene Twins uses that. I prefer that name because I think it really captures them because in 2012, the iPhone completely changed their consciousness. Never seen that before, by the way, since generations have been studied. That sudden shift in 2012, in depression going up, anxiety going up. Essentially, the current generation is taking a lot longer to grow up, and they're a lot more anxious about the world. And we're seeing that in all the statistics. Now, I personally like it that they're taking a long time to grow up. The longer you take to grow up, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Extended adolescence, fine. Because eventually they're going to be having to address these problems. They tend to be politically independent. They tend to feel vulnerable and to not like inequality. They tend to be anxious about income inequality, which I like. They tend to not like it when people are being excluded. This is the IGN. So yeah, they are over parented. Yeah, they don't have a lot of adult skills. 18-year-olds today are a lot like 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds years ago. But then they have these connections with each other, and they have this egalitarianism, this postmodernism. And we'll see. Yeah, they have a lot more depression and more suicidality now, and so do their parents, as a matter of fact. 60% of teenage girls report depression, and 25% of them have some suicide idea they have, and 60% of their moms report depression.
Wow.
You know, it's a difficult time. But in 10 years or so, I'd like to see how these kids are doing. I think that they're going to be doing great. I think they're the future leaders of this country. And, you know, and there needs to be external regulation on very, very powerful people, the oligarchy that runs, that owns everything. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, if 0.001% of the population owns 50% of the country, then there needs to be some kind of adjustment to that. And, they own enough politicians at this point that that's not going to happen, but maybe these kids will change that. I have high hopes for them. And when I work with them one at a time, they receive influence and they grow and they're beautiful. And they're more psychologically sophisticated. They might not know how to balance a checkbook, but they're more psychologically sophisticated than previous generations. And of course, they're all addicted to their phones. And so phone addiction is something that is encouraged in all over the place. But just like all the other addictions, eventually we all as humans have to deal with the fact that we're surrounded by addictive substances, and we either use them in a controlled fashion or we don't.
Yeah. Well, this has been a beautiful tour de force through the evolutionary story of your journey, of your life, of your work. I am called to ask you as we bring this to, not to landing, but to a pause, what are you looking forward to, and what are you still working on in yourself?
Well, Robert Keegan talks about self-conforming mind, self-authoring mind, self-transforming mind. And, he's a stage theorist. He knows integral and has contributed. And you do enough development, and what you do is you maintain your systems, and then missions come, work comes. Psychotherapy is like that. You sit down for any therapy session. As a therapist, you really have no idea what you're going to be dealing with. It could be anything that has to do with the human experience. So you just stay open and engaged, and then deal with whatever you deal with. So trauma and transcendence showed up as something that I needed to write and put out, and I'm doing that now. Rearranging my website so I can give away all my stuff. And that was a recent insight that I'm looking forward to. And after that, it depends. Somebody like you asks me to come teach. Sure, I love that. My favorite story about this is I got a call once from a guy called, "Hi, this is Ian McDonald from Brazil. We want you to be flown to Portugal and to teach at this billionaire's 80th birthday party." I said, "Yeah, right." Sure, Ian McDonald from Brazil. Well, as it turns out, he was the real deal. So, there were 16 speakers from around the world. this Abilio Diniz in Brazil flew us all and 300 of his favorite Brazilian friends to this 5-star resort that he bought for 4 days. And, we all gave talks. And so that led me into some material that I found was pretty exciting. I wanted to, I didn't realize that they wanted me to teach stuff that they'd already seen on the internet. I thought they wanted me to teach something new. So I came up with a new thing. And they go, wait a minute, what about that 5-star thing that in your book on 5-star practice and everything? I went, well, yeah, that's what I did last year. I thought you wanted me to do, that was me being naive, I guess. Anyway, that happened and then led me into developing some more material and then led me into going to Brazil and teaching a couple of times. And I don't fly there anymore, but I still will teach once or twice a year to an integral group that has different cohorts that they take through a 12-month program. Stuff like that happens. And so I assume stuff like that will continue to happen. And I assume that every once in a while, something will come down the line that will give me an added sense organ. For instance, the last one was Temple Grandin's book on visual thinking. That research was very illuminating to me. The 3 different thinking styles and how we all have different combinations of them. It helped me understand the problems a lot of kids have in school. And also it made me understand still another reason why I hated that No Child Left Behind legislation. People forget that before Trump, George Bush was the worst president we ever had. Okay. He was a bad president. That No Child Left Behind legislation really screwed up education because all across the country, people started teaching to tests rather than teaching to transforming students. And everybody now has to deal with that added burden. Anyway, so as stuff like that comes, and then I feel moved to share perspectives on it, I will. I'll do it on my podcasts, and I'll do it on other people's podcasts. And if I'm moved, I'll write blogs. And if I'll go teach, and if I move to write another book, I'll write another book. And I assume that'll go on for the foreseeable future. I imagine there's another stage where I won't want to do all that stuff, but I'm not close to that right now. So,
well, a great teacher once said, it's a good idea to die, to get to your deathbed when you still have 60 years of work ahead of you. So you simply go on the other side and you pick up the work. You literally write your job description to the next time around. So maybe that's something to consider.
Sure. If there is reincarnation, first of all, I'll be surprised. But and second of all, sure, that would be. I like being alive. I think I'd like being alive again. But who knows?
Reincarnation is one name, one framing. There could be another framing for that, but that belongs in a whole other different conversation.
Sure, I'm open to it. I'm open to both sides of that one. I'm open to both sides of almost everything, as a matter of fact.
Well, so this has been an extraordinary journey, and what stays with me from the entire arc of the story is that propelling spirit of forever seeking to find the next piece of the puzzle that's missing, to find what's working, to find what's true, to find what's beautiful, to find a way to heal even more impactfully with for faster and for longer time. All of the above is what I'm getting, and inside it all there is a spiritual drive that continually rejuvenates and fuels from one iteration to the next. So thank you so much for sharing this story here with us on the portals. It probably will be broken into 2 episodes.
Sure.
And I loved the time we spent together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aviv. And thanks for doing this. This is quite a service to do this. So thank you for doing this service to all of us.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.